All right. So today we're going to be talking about Chesty Puller. I figured we'd start off with just your kind of description of Chesty Puller. You were obviously in the Marines.
Sure.
Let's take before you read this book, because you hadn't read this book before a few days ago, right?
I'd read it once before. I don't remember when. I don't know if it was on a deployment or in boot camp. So I knew I had read it, but it was fuzzy. Like I couldn't have recalled like all the, oh, I remember this in chapter 2, 3, something like that.
Yeah.
Let's say it'd been maybe 15, 20 years since I read it, and I don't remember when I read it.
Okay. Gotcha.
So it was a great refresher.
So what, from the inside, because I'm outside looking in, I've read the book. I listened to a Jocko podcast. He covered the book on one of his earlier podcasts. But like, how is Chesty introduced to you? So when you're in are you introduced to him in boot camp?
Oh, absolutely. So I think we touched on this before on the previous podcast, how boot camp basically you start out going to boot camp as a human being. The moment you get to boot camp, you become lower than a human being. You're a recruit, right? You don't get to say I, me, it's this recruit because you're subhuman, right? Then, if slash when you get through boot camp, you not only regain your humanity, but in the Marine Corps' eyes, you're greater than a human because you're a Marine now, right? So in this 3-month period, you go from human to less than human to better than human in the Marine Corps' mindset, right? Okay. And so most of what the Marine Corps boot camp is about is teaching you how to talk like a Marine, how to walk like a Marine, how to, march, dress. It's basically teaching you all the jargon and uniforms and history. It's basically just laying the foundation. You don't really, after boot camp, you go learn your skill of whatever job you're going to do in the Marine Corps. But the Marine Corps is basically just to teach you in 3 months from being a human to a Marine, how to dress, talk, walk, all this other stuff. Okay. And so a lot of that is Marine Corps history. I think we touched on it before, Marines are fanatical, but they're mostly fanatical about being Marines, right? Like the Marine Corps loves, the Marine Corps. And so we have so much Marine Corps history. It's just drilled into you. This guy did this amazing thing here. This unit did this amazing thing here. It not only teaches you who came before you and why it's such a proud organization, but it also starts instilling into you like, man, all these people before me did this. I can't be the one to bring the Marine Corps down, bring dishonor to the Corps, right? Mm-hmm. Death before dishonor, another famous tagline, right? Mm-hmm. And so the the biggest character in all this Marine Corps history would be Chesty Puller. And so there's legend after legend after legend, since November 10th, 1775, right? That's right. But yeah, he's got to be the biggest one. And, the Marine Corps mascot's a bulldog. And so the Marine Bulldog would go on some of our runs with us in boot camp, and the Bulldog's always named Chesty. And so like he's the man. You sing a song, "Good Night, Chesty," wherever you may be. Like he's a legend. Yeah, he's a legend. I mean, he's more like probably a close parallel being in Texas would be, Heroes of the Alamo, Davy Crockett, not Daniel Boone, Jim Bowie, these guys that just have legendary status in Texas, Chesty's like that in the Marine Corps.
So and we'll get into it, but which stories are because there's so many stories from the book that we'll get into, but like which stories are the ones that like rise to the top within boot camp? Do you recall?
But that's a great question, and I like how you classified that with boot camp. So in boot camp, it'd be mostly the Chosen Reservoir stuff.
The Chosen Reservoir.
Yeah, just because the environment was the worst, which we talked about cold weather. It's just the worst. But then also the numbers and how the numbers against him and how few numbers he had, the equipment, everything else. It was just, just that's unparalleled. As I reread this, and I'm not taking anything away from The Chosen, but what impacted me more rereading this after having gone through 7 years in the infantry and going to combat multiple times was all of his experience and lessons learned in Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
I thought just rereading it with a different set of eyes instead of, being a teenager going through boot camp, being a grown man, having already experienced all this stuff and seeing like, just what a proving ground and what an opportunity for him to learn that was and how amazing that was. So that'd be a 2-part answer. But boot camp definitely chose him.
Definitely Chosen. All right. Awesome. Well, I'm just gonna kind of dive into some of these stories because I want to. Which ones do I want to dive in on first? Let's go to. I want to say this one is in Haiti, where it's the story of the horse. I'm not sure if you remember off the top of your head. So this is Haiti. He is. I want to say he's 20 years old at this time, or 2021, when he volunteers to go to Haiti. And so, anyways, we're there. Diving into the book, it says, from the opposite shore, a native Dominican dress rode out on a magnificent horse, a big buckskin with a white mane and a tail who splashed through the shallows under perfect control, though without bridle or saddle. A wonderful horse, Puller said. I'd surely like to have him. Brunet muttered in Creole, and a rifle cracked. Puller saw one of his men pull his rifle bolt and eject a cartridge. The beautiful horse stood in the river, looking nervously about. His rider floated downstream in a stain of blood. The stunned Puller turned to the Brunet. Did you order that man shot? Hell, sir. You said you wanted a horse. Anything the captain says is our command. We have discipline here, sir. The men seemed unmoved by the cold-blooded killing. My God, catch the horse, get the men over the river, and see if you can find that man's family. Lewis never again expressed himself idly before these soldiers. And I guess we didn't say Chesty's first name is Lewis, so his name is Lewis Puller. And what do you want to hit on why his nickname is Chesty?
Yeah, because he has, I mean, the biggest stack of all time. And let alone, and not just the stack, but most famously the Navy crosses. You know, so that would just be one ribbon out of 50 something ribbons and medals that he have, but it'd have multiple stars on it. And so it's not like for 5 Navy crosses he had just a whole row. That's just one with a bunch of stars, and then a whole bunch of others. And so, I mean, when you get in your dress uniform, you rock what you have, and I mean, his puts everyone's to shame.
Well, what is toward the end of the book? I want to say his the word's not assistant. The Jones, I forget his first name. Jones was the guy who was with him all the time, and he said like the most annoying part of his job was having to redo all of his what's that thing called?
We just call it our stack, or yeah, it is annoying because in the Marine Corps, everything's down to an eighth of an inch. And so it's cool if you get a new ribbon or a medal, and they're kind of interchangeable. And depending on how you dress, sometimes you wear just the medals, sometimes just the ribbons. And if you get a medal, you also have a ribbon for it. So it could be done differently depending on basically the dress code for the event. But the tolerances aren't like, you got to have your belt within an eighth of an inch, the loop out the end, and then your ribbons have to be centered and stacked a certain way. And so if you had this one and then you get another one, you have to get a whole new setup and realign everything. And
is the ribbon like the little squares? Like, because but they're not like this big, right? Because it's like
I mean it'd be about the size of the end of that pin cap. And so that'd be one ribbon, 2, 3, down, 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 down.
And just keeps going.
Yes.
Yeah, and you get 5 Navy crosses and all the accolades.
Yeah. And again, on that one, it would just be one ribbon because a star indicates you got a second one. And so you could have that one ribbon, and then when he got his second Navy Cross, he would have got a star. Third Navy Cross, he would have got a star. He wouldn't have got additional ribbons. So when you see his stack, these are all different awards and medals he's got. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, yeah, anyways, that story was wild to me. I couldn't imagine being 20 years old saying that and having to do shoot a horse. All right, this is actually right after that, another story in the book. Company A waded down the stream without opposition, but as they mounted a ridge beyond, a rifle fired, and there was a terrifying shriek of a bullet overhead. Puller ducked. The lieutenant was at his side, and this is the Haitian lieutenant. Captain Puller, officers do not flinch under fire. They stand. The men take note of this thing. It is of first importance. I'm all right. What makes those damn things sing like that? I will show you, sir, when we have driven an enemy. When the company gained the crest and the ambush had been cleared, Laity, that's how I'm going to say it, I'm not sure if that's how you say it, brought Puller a Caco rifle, a single-shot French 45, a Grau. He exhibited some remarkable ammunition. Oh, that is the right word. No. They have little to fight with, sir, and so they make of it what they can. There's little enough lead, and so they cut telephone wire and stick these bits of copper into the shell, using a little lead to hold them down. It is this that makes such devil screams. At first, it frightens the men. It rattled me. I never heard such a sound. Captain, you never hear the bullet that hits you. It is one of the few blessings of battle. So I like that story because he later on in the book, he's like notorious for never ducking under like when a bullet goes by him. So I guess I had a couple questions for you on this one. Number one, what was it like the first time you heard or downstream of like a bullet cracking off? Did you guys train for that in the Marines?
So in training, so there's a famous saying: every Marine's a rifleman, because everyone goes to the rifle range once a year to qualify. Infantrymen would disagree with that statement because, and this is no, or maybe it is, this isn't throwing any shade or talking down to the other people in the Corps that aren't infantrymen. But infantrymen will say not everyone's a rifleman. Yeah, you go to the range, but that's not the same thing as being a rifleman, right? Okay. So caveat out of the way. When you go to the rifle range, you're down in the pits, and so the range goes up to 500 yards. And at the end of the 500 yards, the 0 yard line, it's like a baseball dugout basically. And so there's Marines down there that are putting the targets up. And then so the bullets are going like right over your head. And so you get used to gunfire right over your head all the time. You hear it snapping, of course, as it's going over you. And then being an actual infantryman, actual rifleman, again, no shade, but a little bit. We do live fire drills all the time where, the machine gunners will be posted up somewhere else while the rest of us are moving to target and they're firing over or beside us. And so you get used to some live fire. All that being said, I think a good approximation would be, training in combat sport, jujitsu, boxing, something else. Um, if you don't train in a combat sport and a fight pops off at the bar in the street, it's going to be pretty jarring. If you've trained in combat sports, but you've never been in a fight, when one happens, it's still going to be jarring, but it's not going to be as jarring because you're like, yeah, it's not the same as sparring, but it's not that different either. Plus, odds are you're going to be way more equipped to handle whoever this knucklehead is who's starting this fight, right? And I think that's a good approximation between, being on the rifle range, doing live fire drills, and then actually being in combat. Like, it's still like, hey, these people are actually shooting at us, not above us, which would be like, me and you go spar and then three dudes try to fight us. Like, it'd be a different thing because it's like, yo, we don't know if these guys are going to pull a weapon, if one of us is going to slip and crack her head on the concrete. You got all these real world issues that you don't in sparring. So that'd be like the closest approximation I could think of.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff from his first deployment to Haiti. So those were kind of two of the lessons I wrote down. And one of the other things, and I'm sure this is part of the legend, and it reminded me of the last podcast when you were talking about when ambushed attack. And I mean, Chesty just goes straight for, like, whenever there's the story, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but whenever they land at Guadalcanal and he walks up, I want to say Edson is the guy who's there, and he's pretty much just like pointing me to where the Japs are and like just heads there in a straight line. But I think when I think of Chesty and the lessons from Haiti, which was his first combat deployment, there's the horse story, kind of like lesson there is be careful with what you're saying. People are listening to what you're saying, which has, obviously that's like a very extreme example, but kind of has implications for just life in general. Right, there's the don't duck, which he obviously just lives by for the rest of his entire career. And then there's like just, I think of it as like the term I think of is like just default aggressive, like always heading straight toward wherever the action is. When you think back to, I mean, Missoula was your first combat deployment, right? Like, what were, if you had to put some like, I mean, I'm sure there's a million lessons in there from going from boot camp to actually going out there and doing the thing. What are kind of like your top lessons learned, things that you didn't expect and learned while you were out there, while you were in Missoula?
It's a good question, an interesting one. I'll just try to walk through it chronologically as I go back through my memories.
And get because I don't think we talked about in the last podcast, like the backstory of how you were on the Marine Expeditionary Unit were you in the Mediterranean at the time? Yeah, give a little backstory there.
So at all times, there's a MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, like you talked about. There's always one from Camp Pendleton on the West Coast, and they're in charge of, that part of the world, Asia, Australia, and, all that. And then there's always one from Camp Lejeune that's in charge of, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, right? And so one battalion, and that's actually one of the things I got into, is the breakdown of the Marine units. So this will be a good foundation. Maybe we'll circle back to it. But a battalion, maybe it make more sense just to, well, we'll circle back to it. So battalion is like the essential unit for the Marine Corps, right? And a battalion will have 5 companies, and it's about 600 dudes total. And those 5 companies get split onto 3 ships. So each of the line companies, which is what you think of as more like the normal company, each of those would have 1 ship they get onto. And each of those ships, being Marines, we're warriors of the sea. We go from the sea to the land, right? And so each of those ships has a particular way to get from the ocean to the ground for fighting. One ship will be a small boat company, be on Zodiacs. One will be what we call a track company, like a floating tank slash armored personnel carrier. And then one will be helo company that'll take obviously helicopters from the ship to the ground, to the land. And so those 3 companies each have their specialty they train up on. Then the other 2 companies, the headquarters company is always going to be on the helo company ship because it's like a mini aircraft carrier. So the headquarters company will be on the helicopter ship. And then weapons company, who's, regular tough infantry dudes, but they just have bigger crew served weapons than the line companies do. Instead of having 7.62 caliber machine guns, they got 50 caliber machine guns. Instead of having the smaller mortars, they have the bigger mortars. Instead of the smaller rockets, they got the bigger rockets, right? And they'll get split between the 3 ships. All right, so there's your mu. Is these 3 ships floating around at all times? There's one out right now on each ocean floating around. And it's called, America's 911 force. The president can send the mu wherever he wants, whenever he wants, and they can. Mu by itself is a pretty independent unit that could handle some business. You got to think you got about 600 gunfighters plus a bunch of helicopters and support. You know, you could do a lot with that in a short amount of time. And so we're floating around, and this was in 2003. Uh, and so one of the funny things about being on deployment is you get cool television and movie programming because the studios give it to the government, I assume, for a tax write-off or something. So you get good programs, either current or pre-released, but there's no commercials because there's no advertising going on. So normally where there'd be a commercial break for a TV show, it's just government propaganda. So it might be 30 seconds of a bald eagle flying with an American flag behind it, and then maybe the next 30 seconds is like how great the current president is, and maybe the next 30 seconds is like a motivational military, like, so it's just government propaganda.
Is this back in the day when it's like VCR, like where you're like
Yeah,
plugging
so
it in?
literally what we had tied up, so in my berthing area on the ship, we had one of those 13-inch white TVs with a built-in VCR, and then of course 550 corded all up because you're on the ship and it's rocking all the time being on the ocean, right? And so anyway, I'm on my berthing area. I had the middle bunk, and I was watching whatever the TV show was, and it cut to George W. Bush basically telling Saddam and his sons they got 72 hours to get out of Iraq. And I immediately thought, well, he's obviously not going to do that. Like, he's not just going to punk out before the whole world, right? So, and then Bush isn't going to back off what he said. So, guess what? That means someone's going in. Well, who's going in? Us. We're the mu, right? Like, that's why we float right there. We're the first ones in. So, as soon as I heard that, I hopped down, went up to the Combat Information Center with some other unit leaders, and they're like, yeah, basically, we're going in. We're like, dang, all right, here we go. Um, which it wasn't the biggest surprise. This was post 9/11, so we were already at war as a country. So it wasn't like, you know, but still, it's pretty shocking. So we didn't know where we were going to go, what we were going to do, and then boom, this happens. Okay, we're invading Iraq. Like, giddy up. Um, and so what we were supposed to do is take our ship to this Air Force base in Greece, and we're supposed to fly from Greece into Iraq. Um, and it was just like for anyone that's seen Band of Brothers, their D-Day invasion. Obviously, that's a much grander scale, right? They're invading all of Europe. We're invading Iraq. But there was a lot of similarities because for anyone that's seen Band of Brothers, they're about to go D-Day, and then they're like, so they're all shaving their mohawks, getting camied up. They're hyped. Oh, we're gone. And they're like, stand down, no invasion today. There's too much clouds or whatever. And they're like, ah. And then they're like, hey, we're gonna leave in 8 hours, so do whatever. But you can't do anything. Like you're already jazzed up. You're about to go to war for the first time. You're gonna invade a country. This might be my last day breathing air. Like this is real deal stuff. And and so obviously just like they couldn't, sleep or do whatever. She's just playing cards, talking to your bros. Same with us. We're supposed to leave. Hey, can't leave today. There's an issue. You got 8 hours, try to get some sleep. So you're like, whatever. So playing cards, just shooting the breeze. Then we're about to go, and this happened for like, I want to say like for 2 days, maybe 3 days. It's just we're gonna go in 8 hours. No, we're not going. We're gonna go in 8 hours. No, we're not going. It's like, so finally we get on planes and we're flying in, and most people are just like red eyed because like your sleep pattern's just jacked, because like okay, we're about to go fly in, and now we're not, and so it's just like whatever. So that was the first memory. I remember we actually get into Iraqi airspace. We're on C-130s, not like some fancy plane. You could see out the back, and it's as rough as you could imagine
Like
inside
the
one of
back
these.
is open.
The ramp isn't all the way down, but like you can see out through the like the back, and then it's just like the barest of benches, and like it's as like it looks like an unkept garage, like an organized garage, but it's like you're flying in a garage basically, right? And it's not moving super fast. And all right, so now we're actually flying in, and it looks like Star Wars. It's all these tracers coming up, from the ground, and you see our aircraft guys shooting back down. And my prayer at that time was, if I get smoked, I want it to at least be while my boots are on the ground. Like I didn't want to get shot up in a plane, like while I'm just flying in. Okay. So that's first two like memories back is
And that's your first time ever getting shot at.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's first two, like the constant go, no go, go, no go, and then actually flying in and seeing all this stuff that
How
looks like
much
Star Wars.
how much time is it from starting to get shot at to you're probably about to get but till you actually land? Are we talking 30 seconds or are we
No,
talking
I would
10 minutes?
say in the multiple of minutes. Like when you said that, my first answer was going to be 30 minutes. Um, but it might not have been that long, or it might have been longer. But it was minutes. And so then we landed at Mosul International Airport, which is basically so Mosul's about the size of Dallas, and they don't have a DFW, but they have Mosul Airport. Reminded me a lot of Love Field, like a good size airport, not some huge thing like DFW, but good size. Okay. So that's where we land. And just like if, an opposing force would land at Love Field, they're surrounded. I mean, there's apartment buildings, there's businesses, everything else. That's how it was at the airport. And so we land, and, there's dudes. So I guess this would be the next lesson learned. So we get told we're going, and, let's say it was, there's 2-3 days at the Air Force Base in Greece, and, maybe 2-3 days getting to the Air Force Base at Greece. So let's say we had 5, 6, 7 days between the time W interrupted our programming to the time we're going in, right? Pause. During that time, I would say the 150 dudes in our company were roughly split into a group of three. You'd have dudes that were like, oh, I can't wait to get there. I'm going to do X, Y, Z by like, talking tough. Then you had a group that was basically not saying anything other than like, wow, this is going to be intense. Like, wonder what's going to happen. Just like not talking tough, not scared. And then you had some that were like, yo, like, what's going to happen? Like, more like timid, nervous, right? And the second and third groups did great. Um, the bravado group, of the people that like, there was a couple dudes that like actually meant it. Like these dudes were like break glass in case of war type of guys, and literally, not just figuratively. Like these guys were about that life, right? But most of the dudes in the bravado group, like, oh, I can't wait to do this. Yeah, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. Of the dudes that folded under fire, they all came from that group. The scared, nervous guys, a lot of those became the best guys under fire. And the ones that were more just like, hey, it is what it is. Hope I don't get my leg blown off. Hope I don't die. Though, like, I don't know of anyone in those two groups that folded. And
Mhm.
of the ones that folded, it was just the bravado group. which I kind of had a suspicion going into it because my only frame of reference to that was a bar fight. Because bar
Mhm.
fight's about as chaotic and dangerous as it can get outside of actual combat. Because you don't know, like we were talking about earlier, like you don't know if it's going to be bottles, knives, guns. If he has 18 buddies that are about to show up, like it's just pure. You don't know if the bouncers are going to help or they're going to kick you in the head when you're down. Like it's just chaos in a bar fight, and it's physically dangerous. And so if a bar fight's going to pop off, the dude that's usually running their mouth about how they're Tommy Tough Guy and XYZ, it's usually that dude that either runs when something starts happening or he gets folded quick because he's never actually been in one. And so I was like, man, I wonder if these guys are like the fake bar tough guys. And
Mhm.
a lot of them ended up being that way. So that was a second lesson learned. Um, and then in that vein, like when we landed, um, you know, your individual squad needed to get basically in what's called a 360, where your feet are all inboard and your heads and your guns are all outboard.
How many people is the squad?
Average 12.
Okay.
Sometimes you get attachments, and it could,
So
whether it's
there's
an attachment of a corpsman or attachment of, a heavier weapons guy, and it could boost the squad number, but average is 12.
and so there's so the 150 all 150 in the company are on a single C-130.
No, no, multiple ones. Like
Oh, okay.
you might have got, I mean, the air wing guys could correct me on this. But I want to say maybe a platoon per. And so typically there's 3 squads in a platoon. So about 36 guys.
Okay.
But then every platoon's going to have a corpsman. You're going to have some attachments. So a platoon's basically 3 squads of attachments, 40 guys. So there might have been one platoon per plane, but it might have been less than that. It might have been 2 squads per plane. 'Cause here's the other thing to factor in. We we were traveling light as far as reinforcements because it was just us 600 dudes going in, right? We weren't, because we're flying in on C-130s. We weren't bringing tanks or anything else, and we weren't bringing Hummers, Humvees. We weren't bringing any of.
Literally just
We
boots on the
were
ground and
boots
food.
on the ground, and so we were loaded down, and so we had to bring so much MREs. We had to bring so much water. We had extra rockets and grenades and ammo and all this stuff, like. I mean, typically when we're training and doing stuff, like let's say you're packed 60 pounds, then you got maybe another 40 pounds between your vest and your helmet and your ammo and your weapon and your food, like maybe 80 to 100 pounds if you're doing like a big long field op. A lot of times less than that. But if you're factoring in helmet, vest, and again, it wasn't just our normal vest. We had our plates in, and those things are like 10 pounds.
Mhm.
So a heavy load normally is like 100 pounds. I gotta say, I mean, it felt like 200, but it was probably 150 pounds we were carrying between all the extra water, all the extra grenades and rockets and ammo, because we didn't know when we were going to get resupplied. We didn't know XYZ. And so we had to be basically self contained on what we could carry. So you're waddling out of this plane as quick as you can with all this gear, and then you're getting down 360, and then you're supposed to move to where we're staying, right? Um,
Are you guys getting shot at once you've landed?
yes. And
And you, instead of leaving the stuff in the plane to fight immediately, you have it all on you and you're fighting just out of the
you,
gate.
you,
You're not leaving anything in the plane
you,
to.
I would say we didn't do much fighting right out of the gate. It was mostly like get out of the plane, get in your 360, evaluate where you're at, and see if you can move. Because where we're supposed to go to, they had these airplane hangars that were like concrete reinforced hills. And
Hmm.
so it was this huge hangar, what I assume the Iraqis kept their fighter jets in. And so, I mean, huge hangars. And on the top was like they had planted grass. So flying over, it would look more like a hill than a hangar. And what I learned what had happened, I didn't know this going in, but like we saw it the next day because we came in at night. What I saw the next day was all these pamphlets, and we're like, so what the Air Force or the Marine Air Wing or some type of aircraft people had done is basically fly over Mosul and like pepper it with these pamphlets saying, hey, the Marines are about to be here. If you don't want to die, don't be here. Which was good because a lot of them, like we would see, like as we were walking around the next day, we'd see a boot here, then 5 feet over a boot here, then 5 feet over a shirt here. And you could just tell like some dude read that pamphlet and just started like taking off his stuff and running away because he didn't want to be there when we landed. So that was the good thing. Like there wasn't opposing force at the airport. But the downside is like those pamphlets went everywhere. And so the dudes that were in Mosul that wanted some action, they're like, okay, like action's going to be here soon. It's they had a little bit. So it was a give and take, more of a benefit to us. And so basically we land, get in a 360, kind of evaluate where we're at, and we're supposed to move from there to the hangars. Now, if, someone had attacked while that's going on, we were capable to fight. Like we would have dropped the packs and just got down to business. And so there was fire coming in, but it wasn't like, there was hundreds of dudes storming us right away and we had to get right after it. But that being said, like one of the next lessons, which tied into the bravado guys, like as we hit the deck, there was dudes that would go into fetal position and just start crying, and the shock was real. Like, you could tell they're out of it, and you're like, yo, you got to snap out of it, bro. We, get to taking care of business. You're putting us all at risk. So it was excuse me. It was shocking to see that. Yeah. And then, we moved to the hangar, and basically each company had a hangar. And then, we set up perimeter, like basically in an L each way. Like one company would have this sector, then the next company would tie in here and have this sector. And so basically the companies basically just lined the airport. We held it for the first 3 days, and they kept trying to take it back for 3 days. And they didn't. And then once the airport was secure and held, and they realized that they weren't getting the airport back, then we got to start punching out into town and taking over the town.
Gosh. Oh, that's a lot going on there. Um, all right, there's so many things to dive into here. Let me see. All right, we're just gonna jump around everywhere today. So back to the Chesty part. One of the there's obviously parts of the book that are hilarious, and then obviously parts of the book that are like extremely serious and tough, and we'll get to that. But one of the things that I thought was just putting yourselves in the shoes of the I want to say, so it was after Nicaragua. It was before World War II when Puller, I want to say it was the first of the Seventh Marines. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So he gets in charge of the first of the Seventh Marines, and he's just putting them through a bunch of training, and essentially he's making them march for hours. Like I think it was toward the end of the book. It said his goal was for the men to be able to march 20 miles and the last 5 miles to be marched at double time. And it's just essentially just marching guys everywhere all the time. And so one of the things I was going to ask you is just like, what is it like marching? What is that in boot camp? Is that constant training that you're doing? Are you guys, when you were going through training, were you still marching 20 miles? And just like, what did that look like? And how did you guys?
Sure. So, doing a forced march, what we call in the Marine Corps a hump. So doing a hump is the most physically painful and taxing thing for an extended period of time. I think we talked about OC spray last time. And so for a short burst, OC is terribly painful.
Oh, what was OC?
The OC spray, maybe we didn't talk
I don't think we
about
talked about
that.
that.
Okay, well, maybe we'll tie back into it. So that's super painful, but it's for a short period of time. Where a hump, you're just, I mean, because again, like let's say you got 60 pounds on you, because you got your pack, your helmet, your vest, your weapon, and you're walking pretty fast. Probably 4 miles an hour is probably about average.
So 15-minute miles
Yeah,
ish.
yeah. And you usually hump for 52 to 55 minutes, and then you pause, you take a little break. Those that smoke, they have a cigarette. Those that don't put in a fresh dip. No one's really doing anything like healthy during the break like you would think. No one's popping Gatorades and stretching. It's
Well,
usually
one of the questions I was going to ask you is how the heck did you go to the bathroom? But I guess it's probably
yeah, it's during that time. But yeah, it's the weird things like the pack starts digging into your shoulders so bad, and then your feet are getting hot and blisters, and just I mean it's the rubbing, and then it's just so painful. It's terrible. Um, and then also it's like it's one of those things where you start thinking, okay, I'm just going to focus on the next step or the next mile. And so it's physically terrible. All right, that being said, so yes, you do it in boot camp and it gets progressively more. I could be wrong on this, but I want to say the longest one in boot camp was like 10, 12, 15 miles. I don't really remember. But then like we were talking about earlier, once you graduate boot camp, then you go to learn whatever your job's going to be. And so for infantrymen, we go to SOI, the School of Infantry. And there's a lot of humps in infantry. And I think the longest one was, I think the final one was 25 miles. And here's the other thing too, like one of the worst things you can be in the Marine Corps is a hump drop. Like someone that says, "Oh, I just can't make it anymore," and they got to medevac you or whatever. Like you're just known the rest of your career as a hump drop. Like even if you did it once, like it's a stain on you, right? But also a lot of times if someone is a hump drop, the rest of the guys got to carry their pack, their weapon, XYZ. So it's not just embarrassing for you, but then it makes it harder. And I remember there was a dude on, it was a hump drop. And that's why I had to take his pack and what's called a SAW, a squad automatic weapon. It's like a light machine gun. So I'm already doing this thing. Now I got all this extra stuff. And then the SAW's super, like, it's not a smooth weapon. So it's like digging into you. That was terrible. And then, so once you, as an infantryman, once you graduate SOI, you go to what's called the fleet. Now you're in the real deal Marine Corps, right? And the first two were like baby steps.
How long is between boot camp and SOI? Is that 6 months, 9 months?
So boot camp's 3 months, then you get like a week off, and then SOI was 6 weeks, I think. And then because I had a weapon specialty, I went to an additional 2 week course. So let's say I was 2 months there. So let's say 5 months between day I go in, day I get to the fleet. And then in the fleet, you do pretty regular humps as a battalion. Maybe average, I don't know, maybe once a month you'll do a battalion hump, all 600 dudes going out together. But as a company, what'll happen a lot of times, because you're constantly, so it's basically a 6 month cycle in the fleet. Let's say everyone just got back from deployment. Then you got 6 months of kind of light training. It's kind of like to decompress from the other year and a half that we're going to get into. So I'm going to talk about the 6 months after deployment first, but know that like that would be the end of the cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it lets the guys that are married, spend some time with their wife and kids. Everyone else, that's when you do your courses, schooling, you do a bunch of classwork, you're doing, weapons maintenance, shooting a lot, still training all the time. Like it'd be an extreme regimen for like someone now, but on the Marine Corps infantry cycle, it's like the most downtime you have, right? That's when people get to put in to take their leave and do all this other stuff. Okay. So kind of a chill's the wrong word, but relatively, yeah. Then after that, you do about 6 months of like more normal training. All right. And so during that normal training, what happens like Monday, trucks will show up, 6 a.m. and they'll drive you, 10, 12 miles to wherever the first field op's going to be on base, right? And, maybe you train in there for a day and then you got to land nav or do an actual company hump. Either way, you're marching with all your stuff. Land nav, it's not as fast of a pace, but it's worse because you're going through like jungle and forest and bugs everywhere and cutting brush. And so equally difficult. So maybe you move a few miles the next day to the next objective where you're going to train. Then you move a few more miles the next day and the next day. And the trucks are supposed to pick you up Thursday or Friday, but the trucks never show up. Never. And I always thought, like, how dumb are these people? Like, how come trucks can't show up where they're supposed to be? Like, surely this is planned in advance. And it's super frustrating, but it teaches you one, to expect the unexpected, right? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. But then also after a while, it's like, of course they're not showing up. They're doing this on purpose. They're not just incompetent. And so you have these high hopes that after this long, tough week of training, you're going to just have this cruising ride back, and then you get a shower and chill with your boys or go home to your family. But then the trucks never show up. So everyone's like, ah. And then you got to hump 20 miles back because you started 10, 12 miles away, but you worked and now instead of having a nice truck ride back, you're having to do a hump all the way back after a hard week. So in the fleet, you do humps like one a month is like a group battalion activity. But all the time you're humping back because the trucks never show up after a field out.
So is because one of the things I thought it's interesting reading like the story, because it's one of the things that's interesting is he's training his guys like that story, right? They're talking about he's marching them 20 miles. Man, and one of the super interesting things that was about Chesty was how they were talking about how in the 20, like he would be marching up and down and carrying people's stuff the entire time, and then once they get to the end, like he's fine and everyone else is dying. Not actually, but Yeah.
Sure.
But one of the things I was wondering, because like you get to stories like I think Guadalcanal, I don't think there was as like long of marches where they had, tens of miles to go. But like Trojan Reservoir, I think one of the stats was like they did 20 miles in 22 hours or 22 miles in 20 hours in like negative temperatures or whatever.
Right.
Did you guys did you ever end up actually doing like long marches in combat where you were
No,
like really, okay,
not at all.
I didn't think so, but I was curious because yeah, it, one of the interesting things that I remember watching this is so random and it's interesting. That's why I love talking to you because like I watch these videos on history, I like watch these more, but I don't really like have the context to know a lot. Like it's super interesting and I think it's awesome. But it's like at the same time, like I'm so naive and ignorant on the subject.
Sure.
Like but one of the super interesting things about Napoleon on the videos I watched is like he's just marching his men like mad. And like one of the things they do is they just hawk people down like the entire time. Like this, the opposing Italian force is moving this way, and his men just double their speed and like catch them every single time. And that's kind of what Puller does in Haiti and Nicaragua. Is he's just like like you see him doing all this crazy training to his guys, and then you see like once he actually gets into combat, like that's one of the things that's saving their butts every time is that they're just like marching everywhere, hawking everybody down, and finding whether it's the bandits in Nicaragua or whether it's getting away from the chosen reservoir. It's just like it all ends up working out. So yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, I think it in modern times, depending on the theater, the topography, whether it's, what the land is like, what the infrastructure is like, it could still have relevance. But a lot of the stuff now is fighting in cities and, we call it MOUT,
Mm,
MOUT, military operations in urban terrain. And that is a vastly different thing. Like what would be a lot more beneficial for that is sprints and stair climbing. Like if
mm,
because that's what you need more than anything else. Like so which a hump is good. Like I think a hump is good mostly for mental strength. Because you could develop I think looking back on it, it breaks your body down more than builds it up, but it's a mental strength. You know that this is like, especially the pack straps. I just keep coming back to that. It's just so painful. And you're just like, okay, this is just going to be extremely painful for however long this is going to be. There's nothing I can do to change it. I just got to keep going. Everything's going to hurt in my body, between my feet getting hot and blistered and hurt to my back being compressed by all this weight. And it's just going to suck. And you just got to embrace the suck. And I got to do it to show my brothers that they can do it. And I can't let my brothers down. And they're thinking the same thing. Like, there's no way I'm going to drop from this hump and let my brothers down, right? They're not going to carry my weapon. I'm going to be here for them. And so the hump is good for mental training. But as far as at least modern application, I think a heavier focus on sprints and stair climbing would be more productive. And also you got to think about, Napoleon didn't have Humvees and helicopters and things like that. Which there's advantages to both. If you get too reliant on stuff, then it's a problem. Like, a mountainous place, like I never went to Afghanistan, but I think about the brothers that went there. Humping probably pays dividends there. If the altitude's too high for helicopters, the terrain's too steep and rugged for vehicles, and you got to be hoofing it all the time, that would probably pay extreme dividends. In Iraq, we had helicopters and Humvees, and then you're on foot for short bursts, going in and out of houses, crossing this street, where sprinting and stairs would make a better
yeah.
thing.
Well,
But
sprinting instead, man. I feel like both they're just different. This is kind of what you're saying. They're just different types of hard. Like
yeah,
one of the things, like this is completely off topic, but the hardest workout by a mile that I do is 7 minute rowing. It's like 7 minutes, but if you had to ask me like, hey, would you rather run for 4 hours or go do the 7 minute workout on the rower? Like the 7 minutes on the rower is exponentially
yeah,
harder. It is just a nightmare to like if you're especially if you don't sprint like all the time like that sprinting like going back and forth between the two like sprint. I guess that's just my opinion. Sprinting can be just as hard like mentally for 7 minutes as I wouldn't say humping for 20 hours because I've never done something like
I
that.
haven't done it that
But
long. Yeah, I mean, I got to think that 25 miler, we probably got it done in 6 hours, probably maybe seven. But yeah, so I wouldn't know. And again, going back to cold weather, I couldn't imagine doing 20 plus miles in cold weather training, let alone with people actually trying to kill you, like, and having that, like, that's
Yeah.
next level.
After being in the chosen reservoir for
Right.
however
And
long
just drained.
they were
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I mean, that's next level. Uh, yeah.
So what you mentioned how the book kind of refreshed you on the Nicaragua. Are there stories from the Nicaragua one that stuck out? The Nicaragua, his time there that stuck out to you?
Um, One thing I put on there is I don't remember if this was specifically from Nicaragua, but I think so. But how he created it said he's the one that created fire teams, and it was 20 years ahead of USMC policy. I was like, that's fascinating. I didn't remember that. Like, I always just assumed, or because it just feels so natural. I thought it was just always Marine Corps policy to have fire teams. So this will be the follow up to what we were talking about the MU and the battalion. Okay. So at least in the infantry, and again, like, infantry guys, I think rightfully give a hard time to the non-infantry Marines, because when people think of Marines, they don't think of, truck drivers and cooks. They think of
Mm.
dudes kicking in doors and doing X, Y, Z, and that's us. And so everyone gets to live off our blood, sweat, and tears. So we're right to, kind of have a chip on our shoulder about that. But the flip side is, like, I know non-infantry guys that have done more in combat than some infantry guys, and infantry guys couldn't do what we do without those people supporting us. And so I had a much harder stance on this 20 years ago when I was fresh out. Like, I've softened a bit on it, got a lot more appreciation. But that being said, so the infantry is typically about 10% of the Marine Corps, and the other 90% supports what the infantry goes and does.
Oh, it's that big of a percentage.
Yeah,
You said 10% are infantry, 90% are not.
that's right.
Okay.
Typically, like, it could be 18% today. It could be, I don't know the numbers today, but typically it's about 10% of the Marine Corps is your infantry. Like, what you think of as a Marine, it's about 10%. And so I can speak to how the infantry is broken down. I can't speak to how, the cooks are broken down or the truck drivers or whatever else. Okay. So in the infantry, your most basic unit is a fire team. It's four dudes. And one of those four dudes, at least in my time, had what was called a SAW, squad automatic weapon. It might be a different thing, but basically the SAW was really cool because it's basically a modern Tommy gun. So typically it'd have a 200 round drum. So just think of a modern Tommy gun. But if you needed to, you could insert a M16 magazine into it, which would go through like that. But if you needed to, you could. But it could also be belt fed, like, like Rambo, and basically have unlimited ammo. And then the other three guys would have, a couple of them have just M16s, and one of them would have an M16 with a grenade launcher on it. And so that's your basic fire team. And so you think about that, like, that's pretty formidable.
Which one were you in your?
So I was a separate thing, which
Okay.
I'll circle back to. So that's a fire team, and a squad would have three of those fire teams. That's how you get your 12-man squad, three fire
Mhm.
teams. Okay. And then a platoon would have three of those squads, right? And then a company would have, first, second, third platoon. So a company would have three of those, plus they'd have a weapons platoon. The weapons platoon, instead of having three squads of riflemen, would have three sections of heavier, basically, you want to call it artillery, firepower, whatever. You'd have one section of machine guns where you have your big boy machine gun. Instead of firing a 5.56 machine gun like the SAW, it's a 7.62 machine gun, like the old, it's 240 Golf now. It used to be the M60. So you'd have a whole section of those, and then you'd have a section of mortars. They're dropping the mortars. And in my time, I heard they just got rid of my MOS, or my military occupational specialty. In my time, we had what was called anti-tank assaultmen, which we'd have, the rifles just like the what we call the line guys in the line platoon. But we'd also have this rocket. You could pick different rockets to put in for different targets, whether it's a tank or blow a hole in the wall or whatever. And we are also the ones in the company that would make little bombs. So we need to make a bomb real quick to blow a door, or we need to do XYZ, we would do that. So we're riflemen, but we also got to have some cool explosives. Okay. And so when you're training in normal training, the platoons, like, you almost never interact with the other companies in your battalion. The
Yeah.
company is very inclusive, and you're doing everything with your company. And within the company, you're very inclusive with your platoon. Like, you see each other every day on the other platoons in the company, but you're not interacting a lot. Okay. When you go train, sometimes each platoon will do its own thing, but sometimes, because what happens typically when you go combat or something else, the weapons platoon will get split. And so you'll have one machine gun from the machine gun section to each of the line platoons, and, one rocket team to each of the line platoons. And then the mortars, they stay in the back by themselves because their stuff's so far away. Okay. So that takes you fire team to squad to platoon to company. And so the company's about 150 dudes between the four platoons, and you got a headquarters platoon with your leaders, a couple of things. And then, so the battalion would then have, the battalion's just a bigger version of how the company's split up. So just like you got first, second, third platoon plus a weapons platoon and your headquarters platoon in the company, in the battalion, you'd have three line companies, which are set up just like the company I told you about. But then you'd have a weapons company that has an even bigger machine guns, even bigger explosives, even bigger mortars. And then you got a headquarters company. And so that battalion is then what gets split onto the three ships. Okay. Then you have a regiment. So a regiment's going to have three of those battalions. So as you're talking about Chesty being in 1-7, the 1 is the battalion, the 7 is the regiment. So it'd be, and you'd say,
Gotcha.
so if someone asks, and that's what the unit is, that's the battalion is the essential unit of the Marine Corps. And so if someone says, "Hey, what unit are you in?" Someone from Chesty's unit would say 1-7, and he means, "Oh, I'm from, the first battalion of the 7th Marine Regiment." And there'd be 1-7, 2-7, 3-7. I was in 1-8, so there's also 1-8, 2-8, 3-8. Same with the 5th Marines and everything like that. And then each of them gets broken down the same way. And so I thought the fire teams, it just makes sense. You got four dudes, you can split the squad up and go here. Like, I just thought like it had been like that since 1775. But to hear that he created it and it took 20 years to implement it, that was pretty interesting. And then another thing I put on here was that he mentioned how dispersed, or he might not have mentioned it specifically, but he was telling one of his stories, and it was basically how dispersion saved him and his team in Nicaragua. And so that's one of the big things we're always like, if you're moving to contact and training or doing something, it's always dispersion, dispersion. So instead of being close to each other, might have a guy there up to the right at 1 o'clock, and then 5 yards back at 7 o'clock is another guy, and he's facing up and to the right, and he's facing up and to the left, weapons outboard, and then just kind of catty corner like that from each other, spread out lengthwise but also widthwise. That way, if you walk into an ambush or someone sets off a claymore or throws a grenade, it's not taking everyone out. You got dispersion, but you can also train your fire super easily. So it's defensively good, but also offensively good. And I thought that was interesting. So that was my three little notes there.
Yeah, there was something. It was later in the book too. Kind of circling back on the firing squad. I want to say it was in Korea. I can't remember if it was. I want to say it was Korea because that's where I think he got the stars or ribbons on the air side. And it was talking about how I think the book said that he claimed that he did, but the author made it sound like he didn't actually like kind of come up with the idea of the air liaisons for the taking the pilots out of the planes and bringing them like on the ground with them so that they could communicate with the pilots in the air on where to drop bombs. Because I knew that was a thing because I'd heard about it in like Iraq and Afghanistan, but it was interesting to see him talk about if he didn't start it, at least being on like the original front of like bringing people from the air onto the ground and bringing them with them. So that was a shame. Another thing that when you were talking, it reminded me about in his training of the first to the seventh. I'm saying that right, first to the seventh.
Yeah, that's fine. Or you could just say 1-7
Or 1-7 when he this is another thing. Like I don't know. The book made it sound like it was uncommon, but I don't know if it was common or not. Like how he brought the cooks in, and the cooks had to learn how to do the navigation and how to fire weapons, and like all the different people in his company. I guess no, his battalion, I guess it is. We're like learning all the different things and going on the marches with the guys, and like all those folks were involved. I don't know if would those be non-infantry people? Or is that essentially the
those
way to
would
say
be
it?
non-infantry
It's like
people,
pulling
and in my experience, that would be super uncommon. That being said, the infantry units are what are called victor units, and again, I got out almost 20 years ago, so a lot can change in 20 years. But at least while I was in, there was no females in victor units. So all of even our non-infantry guys were males as well. So that was different, and they had more exposure to the things we were doing, but they weren't out doing land nav and weapons courses and stuff like this. They were doing their job, and they would deploy with us. And so they had a little bit more exposure to it. But no, they weren't out there getting after it. And so yeah, that would
It's
be
probably
unique
uncommon.
in my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, there's one more story. I wanted to check to see if this one was one that, like I said, there's just so many epic stories that's like which ones are told in the Marine Corps and which ones aren't. So this one is another one from Nicaragua, and when he's going after the bandits, and he walks in to the meet with the native boss who's causing all the havoc. Do you remember this story?
Vaguely.
Yeah. So it says the native boss was a fire eating brigand who had been appointed at the local Jefe Politico. Puller invaded his office, accompanied by a sergeant, and in brief words told the terrorists that he had come to restore order and that troublemakers would fare badly. He ended quietly, "You will be held responsible for any further disorder with your life." As he talked, he saw a partially open drawer in the desk before the chief and the butt of a revolver. The boss looked as if he wanted to snatch the pistol. "Go ahead," Puller said. "Use it if you can. We'll settle this once and for all. You'd better be fast."
That reminds me, in recent times, and maybe General Mattis had read that multiple times, and it led to him saying it. But I don't remember if he was in Afghanistan or Iraq, but he basically met up with some leaders, and he was like, "Look, I don't want any issues, but I'm super paraphrasing this. You can look it up later and do one of your cool clips on the General Mattis quote, but it's basically like, look, I don't want any issues, but I promise you, if you give us issues, I'm going to rain down fire like you couldn't believe and basically kill you all." Um, so yeah, I didn't remember that particularly, but things like that are still being said by leadership.
Yeah, yeah, it's very certain. All right, so we got any other? I'm trying to think of anything else from boot camp that from Chesty's time with the guys in boot camp. But the main thing I just walked away with was just like going absolutely. But and at the time, it must have been a little bit similar because it was after 1939 when he was training the 1-7, but it was before Pearl Harbor, and so he's like getting after the guys and making them go hard. But it's also like kind of like, hey, war's probably on the doorstep, or
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff popping off in the world. So all right, let's jump ahead to Guadalcanal. It's funny because there's so many different things to talk about. I also want to jump back to Missoula in your time there, but
sure.
Guadalcanal, what as they were indoctrinating you with the history of the Marine Corps, where does Guadalcanal fit in that? Like, what do you guys learn about it? Because obviously they've got the Pacific documentary on like Netflix that a lot of people have probably seen, and just from my perspective, what little I know about the entire scope of military history, it's like very like one of the worst places to have been. Right? It's like, how are you introduced to Guadalcanal? How do they talk about it? What are the maybe it's like lessons learned that they pass on to you to boot camp from Guadalcanal?
Sure. So yeah, I would say me personally, and I think I could speak for at least all the infantrymen in the Marine Corps, like the two groups of Marines that I hold in the highest regard, would be the ones doing the island hopping campaign in World War II, and then the guys in Korea shortly after, the Frozen Chosen and all that. I think of all the rough and tough places Marines have been through history, I think those were the two roughest and toughest. Um, and so, yeah, we hold it in high regard, and the famous Marine Corps statue on Iwo Jima of them raising the flag, and talk about Tarawa, of course, Guadalcanal. Just, I mean, just the island hopping campaign is just next level between the conditions and then the fanatical enemy. It just, I mean, it's just savage, and they didn't know how long it was going to end. They thought they were just working their way towards invading the homeland islands of Japan, and then what was that going to be like? And yeah, just, I mean, all the above, just super chaotic, and intense. So lessons learned. Um, I'm super lesson learned one, at least on this side of history, super grateful for the air prowess that we have now. Like we touched a little bit on Seoul, like we landed 600 dudes boots on the ground, but we controlled the air above us, which makes a world of difference. And so, and also accuracy of naval gunfire, which we didn't have to use in Mosul, but available to us now. Like, so between like if we had an aircraft, if we had to redo the island hopping campaign and but we controlled the skies, and we could also get an aircraft carrier group close, and all the big ships could just pour in super accurate naval gunfire and just light those dudes up, and then actually get on the beach without drowning or get stuck in coral or anything else. Be It would never be easy. I mean, an amphibious assault is historically famously crazy difficult, which is one of the things that sets the Marine Corps apart, because it's arguably the toughest thing to do in all of the military is an amphibious assault, and we're the best at it, and that's what really sets us apart. Um, but so it'd always be difficult, but between the accuracy of the naval gunfire if needed, and then the modern aircraft and the accuracy of their fire and just the sheer firepower of it, it would make it extremely difficult, near impossible job easier. Um, but yeah, I mean, those dudes are just legendary. All of them, the ones known, the ones not known, just the sheer grit, not knowing how long they're going to be there, the enemy they were facing, the conditions, just everything else.
Yeah, one of the parts that, and I remember, I'll touch on that second. So there's a part in the book where they, I forget, it must have been on Guadalcanal, because I remember it was a Japanese soldier that they, essentially the US beat the Japanese group. I'm not sure how big of a size it was, but they found the lead officer had like fallen on his sword and had written a letter of like essentially saying like I lost this and I'm going to return my life on short interest, and just boom, like just kill himself right there. And then another story. Have you have you ever heard of Dan Carlin
Yes,
and his hardcore? Did you
yes.
listen to the Hardcore History podcast on the Pacific?
I'm not sure if I listened to that one.
So it's one essentially on, I forget what the title is of it, but he starts the podcast off talking about it's like 30 years. I want to say it's on the order of like 20 years, like over like multiple decades later, where they are still finding Japanese people on those islands who are still fighting World War II. And they have to bring like these Japanese generals from like 20 years ago to the island to talk to the people to tell them that the war is over, because they're so fanatical of like the empire, like everyone would be dead. Like the only way that this war would be done is like there's no other Japanese people alive except for me, like right now. Like that's how fanatical they were. And actually, even as I'm talking about that, it reminds me of the story of when Chesty was a kid and he's like reading the history books about the. Well, this is another thing that was interesting to read, just knowing the time that he grew up on, like looking up to the Confederate soldiers, and like that was still like very like his family was on the Confederate side, and they still very much like looked up to it. And he was talking about like, well, how are these people who are in the Confederate Army like still alive if the Confederate Army? Like, and he was like confused, like as a
Yeah,
kid, of like, oh, like if they lost, wouldn't they all just be dead? Like all of them have
right.
died instead of like some of them still being alive. But anyways, yeah, all to say, when you said the fanatical Japs things, that's reminded me of like reading this book and those stories, just like how just a different mindset it is of like those people who were there. And obviously they'd been at war with China for like years before that.
Yeah.
But yeah, super interesting. All right. Where to go next? Oh, there's this was one I wanted to ask you about, especially being infantry, the volume of fire versus accuracy of fire. Like that was one of the things that Chesty talks about. How like in school they were talking about how volume of fire is what was most important, and then like Chesty stood up in class because it was after he'd been to Haiti and after he'd been to Nicaragua, and he was in classes, and in the classes they were essentially saying like, yeah, volume of fire is more important than accuracy of fire, and he stands up in the class like, no, 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 like accuracy is like far more important. I'm guessing that's still like the case.
Yeah, absolutely. With the caveat that both is nice.
Yeah.
Uh, excuse me, but yeah, one of our little slogans is one shot, one kill, no luck, all skill. Um, and so you definitely want accuracy of fire, which is something we found our opposing force didn't buy into. They're more, if our little tagline would be one shot, one kill, no luck, all skill, their tagline would be spray and pray.
Mhm.
They're just, you know, um, but that being said, sometimes, especially if you're moving to contact, basically you're leapfrogging from cover to cover. Um, you want a couple of your bros laying down suppressing fire as you're moving, keeping their heads down, and you get set, and then you and a couple of bros lay down covering fire for you're not really trying. I mean, it's cool if you hit something. You're basically just trying to keep heads down as you're moving to contact. Um, and so there is a place for volume of fire. Yeah, and I mean it's an impactful thing, when a machine gun cuts loose. It's crazy, it's just ripping the air apart, and so, but that being said, I mean, machine gunners are, I mean, they are professionals in their craft, and they can get those jokers on target too. And so, but yeah, accuracy, because ultimately, if you're just dumping mags and not hitting anything, you got to keep fighting that dude, and so accuracy of fire is important.
Yeah. The other thing, well, there's a million things, but one of the things I was going to ask you, because especially in the Chesty Reservoir, but also while now they're talking about digging, foxholes and like
Sure.
trenches, and it was reminding me of the e-tool, how you were
Yep.
teaching me about the e-tools
Yes.
last time. Um, did you, you said you used e-tools. Did you guys, I'm guessing you guys didn't have foxhole. Did you guys like dig foxhole type things there? Did you guys go out and were you
Not
ever
not
like,
in Iraq. But I mean, in training all the time, you hump out to wherever you're doing the training thing. You always got to be tactical, and so like that's why we never had fires. And you can't just sleep in a field either. You got to sleep in a bush. That's why dudes every morning someone's waking up with a spider bite or something because you're sleeping in the bushes. Um, and then a lot of times you got to dig, fighting positions and interlock your fields of fire and draw little maps and turn in your little map and do all this other stuff, which is great training. It's like the ultimate Boy Scout adventure or whatever. And it teaches you great skills. Like it's not something you should stop doing in training. But in Iraq, we didn't do that.
does that mean just because it was, like you said, like kind of like DFW, like you're in a city versus being out
Yeah, I
in
think
the
that
woods?
has a lot to
So,
do with it. If we're in the fields more, yeah, I'm sure that would happen. But it was basically just going from urban area to urban area.
yeah. And so when you guys were, I guess we can jump back to Missoula. When you guys were in Missoula, was it mainly, would you guys go, so you secure the airport, now you guys start expanding a little bit. Are you guys going out, taking areas, and then setting up camp, like essentially expanding, and like staying further out? Or are you going out and then coming back and
Yeah,
going out
so
and coming back?
once we took and held the airport, that was home base. And then, you're sending platoons and or squads out to do, hey, you go this area, and basically just in simple terms, walk around and wait for a gunfight to happen, right?
Mhm.
And see who's about that life and that type of thing, and just kind of make your presence known and try to gather intel and okay, what's really going on in this building, what's really going on in this business, this apartment complex. We hear there's weapons cache or weapons depot over here. Is there not? Go take this palace of Saddam's sons, go take this palace and get intel and just, I mean, just basically just moving, looking for contacts, looking for a gunfight, see who's about that business, and then also going to certain places to either shut them down if we know for sure that hey, we know there's something going on here, or hey, someone told us something's going on here, go check it out. Um, and always inter-service rivalries are real. But one of the best days of my life is when the army showed up, and this is no shade at all. Like it was wonderful when they showed up. I don't know what division it was. Someone could Google it. What army division? I don't even know if it's a division or a brigade or whatever it's called that showed up. But it seemed like 20,000 dudes showed up, and they had Hummers and armored things and helicopters, and it's like, all right, we're here now. Y'all go to the next thing. We got pulled out. Um, so yeah, that was basically it. Our job was to go take the airport, hold it, and then punch out into the city and let them know we're there. And if anyone wanted some business, give them the business. And then once that was done, the army came and held it, and we're off.
How many, like, how long are we talking from y'all landing to Army Show? Is this days, weeks, months?
Not months. I want to say 3 weeks. Uh, it's probably a pretty good round number.
Okay. So, well, that was interesting. So, one of the things, I'm glad that you kind of touched on it. What, because it's essentially kind of saying looking for people who want the business. It's one of the things, obviously, like Chesty, there's just marching. It's interesting from someone from my perspective, just read about Like literally, he'd be like, "Okay, they're that way. Don't know where they are. We're just gonna take a straight line and head that way. And then once someone shoots at us, we're gonna start a fight."
That's pretty much it.
What? I mean, this is yeah. Like I said, talk to me like the 90%. Like what? I guess there's probably the very first time you do that, and then after you've done it 20 times. Like what is going through your head for that? You leave the wire, and then over the next 2 hours, as you're just like, are you just listening? And then once a shot pops off, like, what's your mental state there? How's your brain operating? Then what
Yeah.
happens when you hear the first bullet?
So I guess
And I know
the
you said it like last time we talked about it briefly, like when ambushed attack, but there's a long period of like the 2 hours building up to it, and then like immediately afterwards, of just like walking around waiting for a bullet to fly.
so I could speak for myself, but also I think the mindset of most dudes is like, "Ugh, I don't want to go do this. Like, because you'd rather be playing cards and joking with your buddy because that's fun and chill, right? And so who doesn't want to do that, right? Like even now in normal life, like it's the human nature is like, oh, I just want to chill on the couch and I don't really want to go to the gym and I don't really want to do X, Y, Z. I just want to chill with my bros or my family. So you have that mindset, like, oh, in 2 hours we got to go do this thing. So there's a little bit of, the comfort factor, right? Like, oh, I'd rather be relatively comfortable, right? Um, then there's a little bit of the apprehension, like, what's going to happen? Am I going to die? Is my face going to get burned off? Am I going to lose a leg? Is it going to happen to my bro? And then you actually go, and so it's more like, just all right, we're out here doing, and part of it's like there's also a cool factor. You're like, yo, like I'm doing what's like you grow up watching in the movies. Like I'm actually here doing this, and I'm in this other country, and wow, it's so different. Um, you march like so. There's a little bit of not wanting to be uncomfortable. A little bit of apprehension, what's going to happen, and then when you're actually out there, like still the apprehension. Um, I I don't think there's and this isn't Tommy tough guy stuff. Like everyone gets scared plenty of times. But I think most of the time it's not really scared when you're out on a patrol or a mission. It's more like just observing. Like I haven't ever been on an elk hunt or anything, but I got to imagine like if I was out on an elk hunt somewhere with wolves and bears and other things that could be and are hunting me back, and I just got a bolt action rifle with a couple rounds in it. It's like, okay, I'm not actually scared of the bear, but like, there could be a bear out here or a pack of wolves or something else. So a little like, but also, oh, I'm in this beautiful mountain. I'm on an elk hunt. So I think it'd be a mix of that. Like, yes, it's tough. I'm humping up and down this mountain. I'm aware that there's things out here that could be or are hunting me back. But also I'm a man with my rifle. I know how to use it. I'm prepared for these things. And wow, this is cool. I think that would probably be a pretty good approximation. And then when it happened, when something goes off, just like if a pack of wolves shows up or a bear comes to attack, which again I can't speak to, but I can just imagine all that's existing in that moment is that. And you do jujitsu as well, and so like that's one of the beautiful things about it. Before you roll, you could be thinking about what you got to do, go to the grocery store, what's coming, someone's birthday's coming up. When you're rolling, all you're doing is rolling,
Mm.
right? Unless you're way better than
Unless you're,
someone, then you're just goofing around. But
unless
like
you're Tony, yeah.
yeah, if you're someone equally matched, like that's all you're doing. That's all that exists for those minutes is this. Um, and obviously that's way lower stakes than a bear or wolf attack or human combat, right? And so when something's going off, that's all that's going on. There's no fear. There's no. I mean, it's just this. And then afterwards is when the adrenaline dump happens, and that's when the shakes come. And so it's like you see people shaking. It's normally not out of fear. It's just their body just had this huge adrenaline dump, and so the body's like had a whole bunch of coffee or something. And so you look back and be like, so I guess before something happens, it's a little scary because it's the unknown. What's going to happen? In the next minute, is that dude going to set off an IED and he's vaporized, but I'm burned alive or my leg's off or, whatever. So there's a little bit of fear there when something's happening. All that's happening is happening. It's not that you're super tough and nothing scares you. It's just that's what's happening. And then after you could look back and be like, yo, that was scary and XYZ and adrenaline dump, stuff like that.
So what for for y'all? Because one of the things that, like I said, I'm just gonna ask the naive questions. Like when I think of it, like if you're just walking through a town like Dallas and someone wants to attack you guys, I would imagine that the first shot is gonna hit somebody. Like right, like you're if there's a group of Marines walking down the street and you don't know the good guys from the bad guys, like a bad guy's gonna pop off and you would think that they're probably gonna hit the first one. Is that kind of how it happened, or is it
Yeah, it
spray?
it,
Is it so spray and
it
pray?
just depends. Um, so I'll answer this and also give a shout out. So Chesty went to VMI, Virginia Military Institute.
Mhm.
He talks about that a lot in there. And my platoon commander got killed. He was my platoon commander in Mosul. And then we deployed separately the second time. We talked about it last time, how what I call my babies. Like when I was a salt dog, these were my boots. These are guys that were 2 years younger than me, but that's everything in the Marine Corps, right? And so these are the guys that basically I raised in the Marine Corps, and then they went on to do much greater things than me and my crew guys ever did. And they were the ones, Operation Phantom Fury, that went into the famous Battle of Fallujah, right? When they were salt dogs, they had their own drop of boots. I was at a different unit. And so that was the biggest battle and the hardest fighting since Vietnam. Was where my babies were. Okay, so the same platoon commander redeployed there. So when we all went together to Mosul, it was mostly Iraqis that we were fighting. When they went back, and then I went back a year after them, is when I went to Baghdad, Fallujah, Ramadi. Um, Most of the Iraqis that wanted to fight were no longer fighting. Either they had changed their minds or they'd gone to the next world or whatever, right? In that year, 2 years. But the fighting was even more intense in '04, '05, '06, '07 than it was in '03. But so many of the people from the jihadi world just flooded in because that's where the fight was. And so who we were fighting, obviously there was a lot of Iraqis still in '04 when my boys went into Fallujah. So not discounting that. But there was also at that time, and even more so later, people coming from Syria, and a lot of people were coming from the Muslim world of Russia, Chechnya, Dagestan, all this type of stuff. So you had,
I didn't appreciate that.
huh?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so you had a lot of these white Russian Muslims that we were fighting over there. And so Lieutenant Malcolm, shout out RIP, he was a graduate of VMI before he came into the Marine Corps as an officer. And he actually got killed by a Chechen sniper over there. And so all that to say, one, shout out to and rest in peace to Lieutenant Malcolm. But also ties into the Chesty book with VMI, but also talking about the fire. So you could have some dude that was, super highly trained, excellent shot. And if he's on you, yeah, the first shot's going to get somebody. You could also have some, young men that are just tired of people being in their country or think it's their duty to do something, whether for nationalism or religious reasons or just for something to do, right? And maybe they're not so highly trained. And so you die just as easy from an untrained bullet as a trained one. But maybe they're more in the spray and pray category. And, maybe him and 8 of his buddies are holed up somewhere in an apartment and they think they're going to get some shots off and, do XYZ and get away scot free. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So it just really depends.
What's the? Is there a? Yeah, was there more of that type of action in Missoula your second time in Fallujah?
So Mosul was weird. Um, there was a lot of gunfires we were landing, and then the first 3 nights they tried to take it back, and it was mostly. Remember, I was saying how,
You guys were kind of holding down the airport and
yeah, and the airport was
attacking
like
the
as a
airport.
rectangle, and like we were splitting it in these little L shapes, and so the attack was coming from these two sides where my company wasn't on. But it was a lot. It was intense, and so you heard and saw a lot, but it was these other two companies getting engaged more. Um, so that was a lot, and then there was a patrol that took some that was pretty heavily engaged when they started pushing out into town, and then it was more sporadic stuff. So then when my guys that were boots on the Mosul one on their next deployment, assault dogs, I mean, it was. I mean, I could bring one of them in here for the next one, and he could talk accurately because he lived it. It's not my place to talk about it, so I wasn't there. But they were, like I said, it was the biggest, most intense combat since Vietnam, and so you could just imagine that. And then on my third deployment, my second one to Iraq, when I was going between Fallujah, Baghdad, and Ramadi, it was way more common. Like it was going off, and like my boys did their thing in Fallujah, and so they obviously handled up. And so there was still stuff going on in Fallujah when I went there, but Ramadi was the hot spot. Like it was going down in Ramadi in 05, 06. But it wasn't like super huge engagements. It'd be like IED goes off here, push to contact a few guys, missile or rocket attack here, pushed a few guys, some guys shooting. It was more like small but frequent engagements.
Yeah. So when you were doing that, or I mean, what's like the scale here? Did you do like 50 patrols and like 10 of them you get into firefights, or is it what's
In
the
Ramadi, so we're going probably next time I talk to one of my bros I did that deployment with, I'll have to ask you his memory on it. I want to say 2, 3 times a week we're going out and doing stuff. I mean, it felt like every other day, every 3 days, we're going out and doing something. So yeah, 2, 3 times a week. And then, so let's say, I mean, it seemed like once a week something was going off. So if, between IEDs, rockets, gunfire, um, yeah, it's over what, 7 months? Be what? 7 times 4 is 28, so maybe 28 of them.
sorry. And when you guys are going on patrols, is that a platoon size that you guys are? I'm guessing it depends.
So in Mosul, it was more typically platoon size, sometimes squad size. It was a different dynamic. This group I was with on my second deployment to Iraq, and so it was vehicle borne. It'd be probably it'd be platoon size, but the components would be different. Because we're not walking, we're in Humvees and or different vehicles. Each Humvee's got a machine gun on the turret on the top, and then 3, 4 dudes in each Humvee, and you're moving through. So that'd be like a platoon size element, but a different configuration than how I explained earlier in a typical infantry platoon.
Gotcha. Interesting. Uh, That's wild. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about too, and we'll probably get close to wrapping up here, but one of the stories from Chosen Reservoir is the story of when they're burying the 117 guys in the frozen, in the mountains essentially. And so they had, I'm not sure how many of them were killed versus froze to death, but they're talking about the burial and they're talking about how there's essentially potato cellars that they blow. They can't even dig into the ground because it's so cold there.
Yeah.
They have to blow the potato cellars up and essentially put the guys in there and then have tanks come and roll over. And it's one of the things like Puller talks about how like essentially if someone was there to take a picture of it, like it would kind of wake America up to like what's going on there and what that's like. And one of the things that I wanted to ask about, and we can cut this out too if we need to, but what like it's easy to read these books and like listen to these stories and like think it's cool stories like oh here Chesty goes like going into combat and it's like one sentence where 117 people die, or there's one sentence where the guy right behind Polar gets his neck shot off, or there's one sentence where a grenade goes off and kills 3 dudes, and it just like moves on. But like for someone from it's easy to just read that book and like skim over those, but it's like obviously very different. Like, each one of those is a real person who had a life. It's an American Marine, soldier, whoever it is. What Since I'm someone that like, what would you tell me about like, hey, you talked about Lieutenant Malcolm, he got shot. Like, does someone like me who hasn't been there like need to understand? Like, how do we think about that? Like, what would be the message that you would want? like someone like me to take away and understand about that reality of war and like what's like like I said, it's just so easy to read these books and like walk away with all the hero stories, but like not have the real stories of like not spend the time to think about like, hey, yes, we're talking about war. There's some badass things that go on, but at the same time, it's absolutely horrible.
Yeah. The first thing that popped into my mind, quote wise, I believe it was Robert E. Lee tying back to Chesty talking about the Confederacy. It was Robert E. Lee that said, "It's a good thing that war is so terrible, lest we should grow too fond of it." I think there's a lot wrapped up there. It's, people that get into jujitsu really get into it. I think one of the main reasons for what we touched on earlier, when you're rolling, that's all that exists. And there's very few things like that in life. And I'm sure, for boxers, Muay Thai guys, whoever's doing some serious combat sport, when you're sparring, you're all in on that. And most of the rest of the time, you're focused on several different things, or at least focusing on one, but thinking about several other. And war is absolutely terrible. Like you see terrible things. And it's across the board, and a lot of it's like unexpected terrible things, which it's hard to put into context. So it's one of those things that if you've been there, you don't have to explain it. If you haven't been there, it's tough to explain it because you don't have any conception of it, right? I guess best thing would be like someone that's, again, let's say they've trained jujitsu for 10 years and maybe they started because they wanted to learn how to defend themselves or not to get bullied or whatever else, but they've never actually been in a fight. After 10 years, they could beat up 99% of the people in the world. But if you haven't been in one yet, like you still, it's like, you can't really explain to that person what those feelings are like when the dude at the bar, cracks you in the side of the face and it's on, right? Like he's prepared for it, and he could kind of understand, but you can't really explain it. And a dude that's been in a bar fight, you don't have to tell him about it, type of thing. So yeah, it's there's so many things that are unexpected and unexpectedly just terrible beyond words. And yeah, when someone uh, gets killed at a young age, it's if they have a family, that's just so sad on so many levels, right? The kids growing up without their dad, and the wife losing her husband. And if they don't have kids, it's so sad too, because this life is snuffed out so early. But like you said, there is also, I believe it was C.S. Lewis, the famous Christian theologian that was talking about, he served in World War One.
I did not appreciate that.
Yeah, he was an infantryman in World War One, and he was in the thick of it. And which World War One, arguably as a whole, toughest war maybe ever, right? Just between the new weapons with old
Yeah,
tactics
machinery, just
and just living in the trenches and just everything, right? And just the volume of it and the artillery and everything else. And he was talking about how it was actually a good thing. How he reflected on war. He was like theologically, he felt that if 'cause he's an Englishman, so he's fighting the Germans, and so he felt as a Christian soldier, if the German soldier was also a Christian and they had both seen each other, shot each other, and both hit each other and died at the same time and saw each other on the other side, they wouldn't hold any grudge against each other. Like, yeah, we're just young men doing our duty as a soldier, right? And he was talking too about how this is from C.S. Lewis again, the famous Christian theologian, that he thought some, and again, he wasn't downplaying the atrocities 'cause he saw atrocities like even us guys in which Iraq couldn't imagine being in the trenches of World War One. That he saw a whole bunch of redeeming qualities. One, it made you really think about life. Like you had to really think about life and death, right? It was in your face. And he was also saying he didn't necessarily think that dying in war was the worst thing. He's like so many of these packs. He talks a lot about pacifists. And he's saying a lot of these pacifists make it out that dying in war is the worst thing possible. He's like, well, I don't know that, catching a bullet from this German would be worse than, withering away from cancer later in life. I don't necessarily, he's not saying it is or it isn't. Um, so there is some redeeming things. That's why you see people like dudes going over and over and over, going back, doing 8 deployments. So again, it'd be lovely if we lived in a utopia and everyone just sang kumbaya and got along and everything like that. But whoever thinks that discounts human nature, we're not cut out for that, right? And so you have to, and this ties back into some of Lewis's thoughts on pacifism. You have to acknowledge from the jump that human nature is what human nature is. And because of that, there's always going to be people that are going to bully, kill, steal, do all this other stuff. So either got to live your life saying, okay, I'm going to let an individual do that, but then there's also nations that have that same thought process. And at what point is it worth fighting for, right? And as such, there's some negative things that come with that, but as such, there's also some redeeming things that come from that. So yeah, war is terrible and goes back to the leak what we started with. It's a good thing war is so terrible lest we grow too fond of it. I think Chesty would wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah, when you're talking about C.S. Lewis line, there's a line in the book where Chesty is telling the men the same thing. So there's worse things than dying for your country, essentially.
Yeah.
But what other notes do you have?
We hit all of mine. Yep, all four of mine we hit.
Oh, nice. All right. Well, I figured I'd finish up on a fun note. What's Jed's top submission in jiu-jitsu?
Uh,
No, that I don't even know if you've ever tried to submit me because you could easily if you tried, but
yeah,
I haven't been on the receiving end of Jed truly. I've received Jed bench pressing me, like throwing me 10 feet across the room when I get like a, a little bit on offense, but I've never gotten a full Jed submission outside of a just from the bottom. What's it called when you do
the Ezekiel.
Ezekiel from the bottom?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, Tony and David and some others humorously call what I do Jed Jitsu. I don't give that title myself. Um, but it's like you're right. My whole thing is I love playing defense. I want the other person to throw their whole arsenal at me. I get more enjoyment out of surviving around not being submitted than from submitting. And so that's why I love people going 100% offense and me going 100% defense. I want to see if I can survive the round, not get submitted, and if possible, sweep. So I think objectively, my defense is a whole lot better than my offense because that's what my focus is. And so you're right. I do not have a repertoire of submissions. And so I think I would probably my favorite one would be
Ezekiel.
Ezekiel either from the bottom or from inside someone else's guard. Because most people are thinking like, okay, if I'm in the guard, I can't be submitted. And sometimes I sneak that in and get taps from inside someone else's guard. So yeah, I would agree with everything you said there. I'm far more focused on defense than offense, but if I had to pick one, it'd be the Ezekiel either from bottom or inside someone else's guard.
One of my favorite things is to watch someone who I know hasn't gone with you before. Watching you do the jiu-jitsu, just seeing them. There was this one guy. I couldn't say his name even if I wanted to because I don't remember it. But he was a newer guy, and because when you're a white belt, like you barely even
Sure.
know like what you're doing. You hop on someone, you're like, I hope this person at least moves around, so like I'm not sitting there like how I mean, there's still even times today like I'm trying to choke someone who's way better than me, and they won't even like defend their neck, and I still can't choke them.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most humbling like experiences in the world if like someone's literally just playing dead and you still can't get to them. But yeah, I remember just I love watching people go up to you for the first time, and yeah, this one kid came and he was like, "What is this guy doing?" He just sat there. I was like, "And you still couldn't do anything." Like that's the whole thing. Like you still. I mean, it must have taken me a year. I would say it was probably legitimately a year into jujitsu before I was able to, and it's still a huge shot to get your arm away from right here.
Yeah.
Like it was a year or more of me being into jujitsu before I could do. And even now, like if you do that, it's still gonna take me 45 seconds just to get the arm from like there to there. But anywho,
So what's your favorite submission?
man, I rely far too heavily on triangle, like heading on triangle with my legs, because what I mean, similar on the defense front. Like when you're new, you just start on like you're always on defense so much
Sure.
that you just like get into defense. And one, I'm not the best at showing up for the drilling part of class. Like a lot of times I'll how the first 30 minutes is the drilling and the second
Yeah.
half. Uh, I I should be very much ashamed of like how I'm normally missing that. But so your defense gets really good and then your offense is tough. So one of the things that I learned to do really early on, I mean obviously I've got long legs,
Yeah.
but from the half guard you can kind of sneak your legs up and get into the triangle with your legs pretty quick. And so that was, I mean, by far the one that I would do the most is that one. And then lately I've gotten like a little bit more dynamic where if I get to someone's back in like a body triangle,
Yeah, your body triangle's terrible.
my legs are long
I mean,
enough.
terrible in a good way.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
terrible to receive.
Yeah, yeah, and so my legs are long enough to where, but just like anything, like I depend on them too much. So like those are my go-tos, but it's like at the point now where it's like I try to not do those as much. Like one of the things I've been trying to do a lot more, I should just try legs. I don't. I think you and I are on the same page of like neither of us are that great
Yeah,
when it,
yeah,
when it
hundred
gets
percent.
when it gets to the leg game. But one of the things I try to start doing more is arm bars. Oh my dude, I arm barred myself the other day.
What?
Yeah, I was going with Pat and he was on top of me and I was trying to throw, so I was on bottom, he was on top. I was trying to throw my leg over him to catch him inside his hip and then roll him over to the other side. And I was pushing, I don't remember why. Like my left arm was like pushed and extended. And when I threw my leg over, he moved to where my arm was out. And instead of catching his arm or his thigh, I caught my own arm and like arm barred myself.
That's
And
wild.
yeah, I literally like I said like I was like I have to stop and I was like, I literally like tapped myself, and he's like trying to figure. It took him like 5 seconds to figure out like what went on. I was like, dude, I just armbarred myself when I threw that leg over.
That's true.
But anyhow, I will, man. Appreciate you coming through. Any other Chesty story? I mean, there's so many. Any other ones that you want people to know?
Man,
The We're Surrounded one.
yeah, that's what I was about to say. Just again, shout out to the Chosen Reservoir guys. Like guys in Korea, arguably that was the toughest time, and they get the least attention and respect because it's so little people talk about it, know about it, and it's just so inverse because they should be getting the most glory and respect and honor, and they are arguably the most forgotten. So just and we still got some of those veterans alive today from the Frozen Chosen.
Do we really?
There's still some alive. Fewer and fewer, of course, but yeah, anyone that sees this, if you ever see a Marine Korean War veteran, give them a big hug and a salute because, I mean, those guys did it and they don't get nearly enough love and attention. That's what the next series or movie should be on because it's just so fascinating and those guys need some glory and love.
Yeah, you're right. They don't really have like they've got a Band of Brothers. They've got the Pacific series. They don't really have one.
No. I mean, the closest thing would be was that the Clint Eastwood "Get Off My Lawn" movie? You know which one I'm talking about? Gran Torino. You never seen Gran?
I've
Torino?
heard it, but I was
You
born in
should-
'93, so there's like a
No, it's relatively new.
oh, is it?
Yeah, you should watch it. Gran Torino. So anyway, he's a Korean War vet, but it's like him in his 80s. It's not about the time, but you see the grit from one of those guys in that. But that's the closest thing they got is Gran Torino, and it's kind of like, oh, this is just who the character was 30, 40 years ago, and this is how he is now as an old man. It's not even about that.
Oh, it's not okay.
But it's a great movie. You should definitely watch it. And yeah, so just shout out to all the Korean War guys.
Awesome. All right. Appreciate you, dude.
Thank you,
Let's
brother.
call it.